Hey, what's up, my people? John Middlekauff, new YouTube channel. What I need you to do, subscribe, like the video, leave a comment, share with your friends. Appreciate everyone that has. It's the podcast, 3 and Out. You can listen wherever you listen to podcasts. Apple, Spotify. We got you covered. Also, thevolume.com, thevolume.com. We got merch right here. FlexFit hat. Go to thevolume.com. Get yourself a 3 and Out hat. Okay, we just had some breaking news. Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos have traded for Zach Wilson. I don't want to say it was shocking because the Jets have been trying to give this guy away now for a couple months, really since the combine. And now the Zach Wilson era ends. And I think let's look at it from the Denver side and then the Jet side. They basically flip-flop. They give him a 6th, they get a 7th back, so they swap some spots late in the draft. And the Jets, I don't know the exact amount of money, but are eating a chunk, if not the majority, of his $5.5 million salary, which was a big kind of impediment to trading him, because a $5.5 million backup you view as a guy that can play. So no one was going to trade you anything of value for a backup quarterback that makes $5.5 million. I mean, Baker last year signed for 4. Darnold signed for like less than 3. So that was a huge problem here. The money, the business of football, because he was such a high pick. Let's start with Denver. When you draft not near the top 5 in a year when a ton of quarterbacks could go, you don't control your own destiny. And because of the Russell Wilson trade and what it did to them draft-wise over the couple years, and then cutting him, what it does to your cap, you do have some limitations. So going from where they are in the draft, trying to trade up in the top, 4 or 5 picks, I don't really think they're in a position to do that. Now, it doesn't mean it won't happen. Maybe they just mortgage everything and trade up with the Cardinals to 4 and draft a quarterback. But I think we can all agree that would be somewhat shocking. But currently, they had DiNucci and Stidham on their roster. Now, is Zach Wilson better than either one of those two? I don't know. You would probably bet against it. But I do think you have to have some contingency plans of looking at this like, listen, we're getting this guy for nothing, that maybe we strike a little oil. It's what the Steelers did with Justin Fields. It's what the Jags did with Mac Jones. The thing is, all of those guys are on 1-year contracts, right? They are set to be a free agent because obviously none of them got their first round option picked up a year ago. So, or I guess, well, yeah, it would have been last year or would have been this year. Now I'm confused, but clearly none of them did. It would have been this year. You could pick up the 5th-year option after their 4th year, not their 3rd year, obviously. But I think with the Broncos is like there is a chance. I would say maybe above 50% that this is their quarterback room, and they just kind of bottom out because their team's not going to be that good, right? It's just not. They cut a bunch of players. Obviously, they got rid of Russell Wilson, which I totally understand. But Russell Wilson is better than these guys. They just didn't think Russell Wilson was nearly good enough to justify keep paying him $40+ million. But this gets back to Sean Payton taking this job. It's like, hey, man, this is not, I get they're offering you $18, $20 million a year. They offered him like a $90 million contract. He's being paid like a player. Hard to turn down money. A lot of people talk a big game. Oh, yeah, that's not that interested. Throw a little coin in front of them. Whatever relative is to your industry gets people to think twice. They gave him $90+ million in full control. He can do whatever the hell he wants. George Payton's just told to facilitate his ideas. That's what's currently going on in Denver. But I don't view this as like he thinks Zach Wilson is something. It's like, hey, we're in a little desperation. This is a guy that a couple years ago, a lot of people viewed as the second best prospect in the draft. I mean, the Jets were not alone. I personally did not. I thought that it was Justin Fields. Wrong on that. Turned out the entire quarterback class sucks. And Trevor Lawrence still has a lot to prove, but he's in a different universe than these other cats. And the Broncos, to me, are just preparing that the draft's out of their control. So if guys fly off the board, what if Penix is gone? That they're like, listen, we're not taking Bo Nix in the top 15, and who knows if he's there when we draft with our second pick. So you look at a team that has limited assets financially and draft-wise over the last couple years, that they're in a little bit of a desperate situation. Like, I kept thinking, like, why wouldn't, like, the Chiefs or the Bills or a team with an established guy get this guy for nothing? And clearly they wanted no part of him, right? Because they could, I mean, the Chiefs chose Carson Wentz over the flyer that is Zach Wilson. Now, you could argue he's even toxic is the wrong word. You could argue he was that last year because of the way everything played out. He's just viewed as not very good at all. I mean, really bad. I mean, the guy's been benched like 3 or 4 times in a 12-month span, and not exactly always for Aaron Rodgers. I mean, he's getting benched for nobodies. So even though I kind of like Mike White, and Mike White made some money going down to Miami. But I think Denver is just looking at this a little bit like he's cheap, doesn't cost us anything, and we're desperate. It's really that simple. And then on the Jet side, let's face it, I do think last year in the offseason, when they got or knew, even before they knew 100% they were getting Aaron Rodgers, because it wasn't a done deal, it was clear. Aaron Rodgers was never playing for the Packers again. And really the only team going all in on him was the Jets. It's not like there were a bunch of other teams bidding for him. They should have moved on from him then. They had the opportunity. That they probably could have got rid of, a lot like the 49ers, right? The 49ers got rid of Trey Lance last training camp to the Dallas Cowboys. They got a 4th-round pick. Now, could the Jets have got that last offseason for Zach Wilson? I don't know. But they probably could have got a 5th or a 6th and unloaded his money and never had to eat a penny of the last 2 years because they had already paid the bonus. But they didn't. He wanted his cake and being able to eat it too, because they're like, we got Aaron Rodgers. Maybe he can rehabilitate this guy and help him out. And everything was kind of hunky-dory in OTAs, then even training camp. Like, they're best buddies. Aaron got hurt, and then stories started coming out. He never talked to him again. So it's like they made a bad mistake, separate from the disaster that was the draft pick. I'm just saying they had new information. Because listen, I understand liking a player coming out and then it not working out. Happens all the time, especially at quarterback. But after a couple year span and everything that went down, like they had the information. And then they get Aaron Rodgers, like, fuck you, pivot. Don't try to chase a bad deal with more bad money. That's what it felt like they did. And they wasted, this was like a financial decision, they wasted a lot of money for no reason when they could have just punted and moved on. And they didn't. Joe Douglas has made some good moves, clearly. But this move essentially, if Aaron Rodgers now coming back off the injury, he's 40 years old, doesn't go that well. Remember, when he was healthy with the Packers a couple years ago, he was not as good as he had been. So he was a guy trending in the wrong direction. And if you just say, let's say best case scenario this year, he's like I don't know. I mean, I don't know if he's a top 10 quarterback. I guess best case scenario, he could be like the 5th or 6th best quarterback. But that seems, at 40 years old, coming off an Achilles, I think the most realistic scenario, he's somewhere between 10 and 15. Some good games, some bad games. And the athletic ability that made him special once upon a time is nowhere near the same. And that's the problem, is they had to chase Aaron Rodgers because the disaster that was Zach Wilson. And then because it's football, you just fucking rip your Achilles and it derails everything. And now let's face it, these guys are all coaching, GMing, the whole thing for their job. That's why everyone thinks that, like, yeah, they need offensive linemen. And they got 2 tackles, one who's been injured a lot, another guy who's been pretty durable, but he was injured last year. That, like, the safe move, take an offensive lineman. A lot of people around the league think they're going to go with Brock Bowers because it's all about 2024. If they're not 10-plus wins and a wild card, like, adios to everybody. Like, they're all going to get fired. And it gets back to what a wise man told me a long time ago. Because once they made the Jamal Adams trade, they made some good moves. They had a bunch of draft capital. It's like we could hit on 6, 7, 8 picks, and they all could be a couple Pro Bowlers, high-end starters, a bunch of good players. If we miss on the quarterback, none of it matters. And it's a great lesson. Like, most times, the 49ers whiffed on Trey Lance. Whiffed. But somehow Brock Purdy fell into their lap and saved the operation. That didn't happen here. They thought they had found their savior in this 39-year-old Aaron Rodgers. He's taking everyone to Madison Square Garden, buddy. The moment that Achilles ripped, it's like we're in major, major trouble. And because we got greedy, hoping we could rehabilitate this guy, we had to play Zach Wilson. And that was obviously a disaster. The leaks. Remember in the middle of last year, Zach Wilson got benched and said, like, I'm not going back in. The story leaked. Saul was pissed off, checking people's phones. It's just been a disastrous situation. In big picture, you could say, like, listen, Saleh was very, very successful as a defensive coordinator. Joe Douglas was like beloved by people in the Ravens and the Eagles. Maybe it's the Jets. The Jets are just a place where it's very, very difficult. Owner's a kook. They are now just pretty consistently just a complete dumpster fire. And the pressure that's on this organization, now the division has gotten worse. Belichick's out, the Patriots are in shambles. The Dolphins, ton of pressure on them, and they've gotten worse this offseason. Obviously, the Bills on paper are worse, but they're light years better than the Jets. But they're still like clearly just man for man on the roster, not as good. Even Brandon Beane said that a couple weeks ago when they traded Diggs. Our team today is not as good without Diggs on the team. Now, that we'll see what happens over the next week, who they add in this draft at that position. But they did just remove a guy. Even if you think he's trending in the wrong direction, he was still one of the better players on their team. And they got a pick in like 7 years in the second round. So it's like, it's not helping them now. I don't know. I bought into the Jets last year. I was like, I picked them to win the division. Obviously, that ended 5 plays into the season. But I'm not buying it this year. They're a team put together with a bunch of injured guys, depending all on this 40-year-old guy coming off a major, major injury. And I don't know. The coach has not proven that he knows what he's doing as a head coach. And Nathaniel Hackett, I think we all agree, if you had to rank offensive coordinators in the NFL in 2024, I don't see how he'd be any higher than like the bottom 5. Bald guy, root for him, seems like a nice guy. Doesn't seem like a really good coach, though, at all. So the Broncos, I get it. They're desperate. This was cheap. Like, whatever, we'll take a flyer. Cost us what? 20 picks in the 200s? Who gives a shit? The Jets, this is basically acknowledging what we already knew a year and a half ago. This was a disastrous pick. It wasn't like you missed on the pick. Disastrous pick.